All right, so buckle up for a case that kind of flips the script on us. We usually dive into these mysteries, try and figure out who done it. But this time we know the suspect right from the start. The real mystery is, how did the victim die?
And maybe even if it was a murder at all.
Yeah, exactly. It all starts with what seems like just your everyday tragedy. We got Jim and Nikki Capello living a seemingly pretty normal life in Huntsville, Alabama. But if you kind of scratch the surface a bit, there's some trouble brewing. A rocky marriage, some talk of possible drug use.
And rumors of Jim's infidelity.
Yeah, now on their own, those details wouldn't necessarily raise any eyebrows. I mean, those things happen.
Right. But it's what Nikki does after Jim disappears that's really strange.
It's like she took a crash course in how to make investigators suspicious 101 or something. First, there's the delayed missing person report. Think about it. If your spouse just vanished, wouldn't you be freaking out?
Of course. You'd be calling everyone, the police, their friends, their family, everyone.
Exactly. But Nikki waited an unusually long time before going to the police.
And then she gives them Jim's stuff, like willingly. His keys, his computer, even his cell phone.
Oh, yeah. Giving up your phone. I mean, that's basically unheard of these days.
Yeah.
Especially if your spouse is missing.
Yeah, especially it's like she's trying to control what the police could find, you know?
Right, exactly. Like, here's all the evidence I want you to see. But the final red flag, for me at least, it's Nikki's reluctance to let police search their house.
Especially the garage.
Oh, yeah, especially the garage.
It's like she's trying to hide something specific.
Which, of course, just makes them even more suspicious.
Right.
Right.
And then things take a pretty dark turn when Nikki calls up her friend Crystal. During that call, Nikki asks Crystal for help burying a body.
And confesses to killing Jim with insulin.
A really chilling admission. And one that raises so many questions. I mean, especially because Jim's disappearance seems so ordinary at first.
Yeah, like a sudden plot twist.
Exactly. And guess where they find Jim's body?
I'm guessing the garage.
You guessed it.
Yeah.
Right there in the garage.
Okay.
The one place Nikki tried to keep him out of it.
So now it's not just a missing person case anymore. It's a potential homicide.
Definitely.
But there's a catch. The body's so decomposed that figuring out how he died is a huge challenge.
That's a big problem.
Yeah, it is.
This is where things get really interesting, though, because most people associate insulin with diabetes, right? But in this case, it's the suspected murder weapon.
So to really understand this case, we need to understand insulin itself.
Absolutely.
So for our listener out there, let's break this down. Insulin's this hormone that regulates blood sugar. People with diabetes have to inject it because their bodies don't make enough naturally.
Right. But for someone who doesn't have diabetes, injecting too much insulin can be fatal. Like, it throws their blood sugar levels all out of whack.
And that can lead to all sorts of complications, eventually even death.
Exactly.
And here's the kicker. Insulin breaks down in the body after a certain amount of time, making it almost impossible to detect.
Like, it vanishes without a trace.
It's like the perfect murder weapon, right?
Pretty much.
But how do you even start building a case against someone when you can't even prove the murder weapon existed?
Well, that's where circumstantial evidence comes into play. It's like you're putting together a puzzle.
Oh, I like that.
You don't have all the pieces,
Uh-huh.
but the ones you do have start to paint a picture.
So what pieces of the puzzle start to build the case against Nikki?
Well, one of the first pieces is an empty insulin needle found in their bedroom.
Okay, but someone could just have a needle, right?
For sure, if they're diabetic.
Oh, right.
But no one in the Capello house had diabetes.
So why would that needle even be there then?
Exactly.
What else?
Hospital records from where Nikki worked as a nurse showed that vials of insulin were going missing, coinciding with her shifts.
And insulin's not easy to just get a hold of, is it?
No, not really. It's not like you can just buy it on the street.
Right. That makes it pretty
You're
suspicious.
very suspicious.
Okay. Starting to look pretty bad for Nikki. But is that really enough to convince a jury?
Well, to strengthen their case, they brought in witnesses who knew Jim. His family and a coworker all testified that Jim had slurred speech in the days leading up to his disappearance.
Now, wait a minute. Isn't that a symptom of insulin poisoning?
Exactly.
So that tiny little detail ties back to the missing insulin.
And Nikki's access to it.
Wow. So each piece of the puzzle just keeps reinforcing the others?
Right. It's like they're all connected.
Feels like all roads lead back to Nikki.
And that's what the prosecution was going for. They basically wanted to eliminate every other possibility. The autopsy ruled out all other causes of death, leaving insulin as the most likely explanation.
It's kind of like they're saying, we can't prove it was insulin for sure, but nothing else makes sense.
Exact.
But they weren't done yet, were they?
Nope, they had one more trick up their sleeve.
And that's where Nikki's friend, Ashley, enters the picture.
Her testimony really flips the whole case on its head.
Okay, so what did Ashley say?
She told the court that Nikki had talked about wanting to kill Jim with insulin. She even said Nikki told her she'd tried it before.
Hold on, so not only did she allegedly confess, she admitted to a previous attempt.
That's right.
Wow, that's huge. It goes from maybe she did it to she definitely planned this out.
Absolutely.
This is where things get tricky for the prosecution, though, right? I mean, how do you convince a jury in Huntsville, a place known for its science and technology, that this is what happened, especially when you can't even prove the weapon existed?
They knew they had to appeal to both the head and the heart of the jury.
Makes sense. So did the jury buy it?
Their deliberation was super quick, less than an hour to reach a verdict.
Wow, that's pretty telling. And the verdict?
Guilty. The jury found Nikki Capello guilty of murdering her husband, Jim.
Wow. So even without a clear cause of death, they still found her guilty.
That's the power of a strong circumstantial case.
This has been a whirlwind. We went from a missing person case to a confession to a conviction, all without a murder weapon.
It's a case that really makes you think about how we define justice.
Especially when the truth is so hard to find. We also can't forget about their daughter, Riley. I mean, she lost both parents in all of this.
It's heartbreaking. It makes you think about the ripple effects of this whole thing.
Let's take a minute to really think about the impact this had on Riley when we come back. Man, it's just tough to imagine what Riley must be going through. Losing one parent is hard enough, but to lose both of them in such a messed up way.
Yeah.
It really makes you think about all the people affected by something like this, like the ripple effects just keep going.
It goes way beyond the immediate victim. Family, friends, especially the kids, they're all left to pick up the pieces.
Do we know what happened to Riley after the trial?
She went to live with her aunt. She's got some cousins around her age, so at least there's some sense of normalcy there.
It's got to be a little bit of comfort in this whole awful situation. At least she has people who love her and can support her.
A strong support system is so important for a kid in Riley's position. It can really make all the difference in helping her cope with the trauma.
I can't even imagine the questions she must have as she gets older. That's a lot for a kid to carry.
Absolutely. It brings up another aspect of this case, too. We've been focusing on the evidence and the legal strategy. But we can't forget that this is a real human tragedy.
You're right, it's easy to get caught up in the mystery. But there are real people who are hurting because of this.
It makes you think about the justice system, too. I mean, yeah, Nikki was found guilty, but at what cost? This little girl lost both of her parents.
A whole family torn apart. This case is a powerful example of how circumstantial evidence can work. No murder weapon, no confession, not even a cause of death they could determine. But she was still convicted.
It's all about building a strong case. Like we were saying before, that puzzle analogy. Each piece might not seem like much on its own, but when you put them all together, they create a pretty clear picture.
The prosecution did a really good job with that. They really knew how to tell a story with the evidence.
They walked the jury through every step, connecting all the dots.
It's incredible how much ground we've covered with this deep dive. We started with a missing person case.
Then uncovered a shocking confession.
And learned about insulin as a murder weapon.
It's definitely a fascinating case.
And a disturbing one.
It really challenges how we think about justice and morality.
And of course, we can't forget about little Riley.
Yeah.
Her life is forever changed because of this.
It makes you wonder, how can we better protect kids who are caught up in these tragedies?
That's a really important question. What happens to those kids after the legal system is done?
It's something we need to pay more attention to. These kids face so many challenges. Grief, trauma, financial instability, and then the stigma of their parents' actions.
It's a harsh reminder that justice doesn't always mean a happy ending.
These kids need more support. Therapy, counseling, resources to help them heal and move forward.
You've raised some really important points, but before we dive too deep into that, there's one more thing about this case we haven't talked about yet. Nikki being a nurse. How do you think that played into all of this?
That's a really interesting point. Her profession definitely adds another layer of complexity to this whole thing.
On one hand, you've got this woman dedicated to caring for others, healing people, and then on the other, she's accused of using her medical knowledge to kill someone.
It's a crazy contrast. How could someone who understands the value of life take a life like that?
Maybe being around death and illness all the time desensitized her to it.
It's possible. Maybe working in a hospital gave her this warped sense of control over life and death.
Makes you wonder if she thought she could use her knowledge to make it look like an accident.
It's a chilling thought that her training could have actually helped her commit this crime.
We also have to consider what was going on in her life at the time. A failing marriage, maybe she was worried about losing her daughter.
A lot of emotional turmoil.
Sometimes people make bad decisions when they feel like they have no other options.
Absolutely. Maybe she saw her medical knowledge as a way out of a desperate situation.
It's a tragic reminder that even people in helping professions can make terrible choices.
Definitely makes you think. We tend to think of evil as something separate from us. But this case shows that darkness can exist even in people we trust.
It's a really scary thought.
It is.
We'll be right back to dive deeper into that in just a minute. We were just talking about Nikki being a nurse and how that might played a role in all this.
Yeah, it really makes you think, doesn't it?
Like, did she have this false sense of confidence because of her training?
It's definitely possible. Nurses deal with life or death situations constantly, so maybe she thought she could control the outcome with the insulin, make it look natural, you know?
But she wasn't a doctor, right?
No, but she still had a lot of medical knowledge. Maybe she thought she knew enough to get away with it.
That's a scary thought. Using her knowledge to actually hurt someone instead of help them.
And don't forget, she was going through a lot personally, too.
Oh, right. The marriage was falling apart.
And she was probably terrified of losing her daughter.
So maybe all that stress and fear pushed her to make a really bad decision.
It's like she was trapped and saw this as her only way out.
But to take another person's life, it's just, I don't know.
It's hard to comprehend.
It really makes you question people, you know?
It does. We like to think that evil is something outside of ourselves, but this case shows that it can be much closer than we think.
Like even to the people we trust to care for us.
Exactly.
It's kind of like those witnesses who noticed Jim's slurred speech. They probably didn't think much of it at the time, but it turned out to be a crucial piece of the puzzle.
It just shows how important it is to pay attention to the little things. Sometimes they can lead to something much bigger.
And it shows how regular people can play a role in solving crimes. It's not just about the police and forensics.
It's a community effort.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the big takeaways for our listener?
Well, I think it encourages us to be more observant. Don't dismiss those gut feelings, you know.
If something seems off, trust your instincts.
And if you see something, say something. You never know. Your observation could be the missing piece that helps bring someone to justice.
That's a good point. This case has been a real roller coaster. Insulin poisoning, circumstantial evidence, the impact on Riley. It's been a lot to unpack.
It really makes you think about the dark side of human nature.
But it also shows the power of truth.
Even when it's hidden, the truth can come out with enough digging.
And that justice can prevail.
Even when it seems impossible.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into the insulin murder. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, stay curious and keep searching for the truth.